Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about basics of economics. This is the first lecture of Indian economy as well as macroeconomics. We are going to start with the very basics of difference between micro and macroeconomics. After covering the difference, we are towards evolution of macroeconomics. Evolution of macroeconomics happened in the 1930s and we are going to talk about how it evolved as a different field from microeconomics. Thirdly, we are going to talk about Great Depression in this lecture, the causes and the impacts of Great Depression on the global economy. Let's start with the first one, which is the difference between micro and macroeconomics. Before 1930s, when the classical thought or the classical economics was prevalent in the global economy, at that time micro and macroeconomics were studied together. In fact, macroeconomics was non-existent at that point of time and the entire economic structure was based upon microeconomics. Let's understand the difference between micro and macroeconomics. Microeconomics deals with studying behavior of individuals. So, this means that in microeconomics, you deal with individuals or households or small firms rather than dealing with an entire economy. For example, if you are analyzing the income levels and expenditure patterns of a household, either a household or an individual or a company or a firm, then you're dealing with microeconomics because you're understanding the economic movements at the very micro level. On the other hand, when you move towards macroeconomics, you understand the behavior of the whole economy. So when you're dealing with the economic behavior of a country as a whole, for example, India or Sri Lanka or USA, then you're dealing with macroeconomics because you're studying the entire economy as a whole rather than dealing with small elements available in a country. Secondly, in microeconomics, you study the demand, supply, product pricing, and other various micro variables. For example, when you're dealing with a household, you study the demand as well as the supply patterns of that particular household. So, for example, this is the quantity, this is the price. For a household, this is the aggregate demand curve, which shows that at a particular price, this is the quantity demanded. At the same time, you might compare it with another household wherein the aggregate demand curve might be like this. This means that at this particular price, it is demanding this much, but at a lesser price, it is demanding different from the demand made by household A. So, the study of demand, supply, product pricing, and other things related to a household or at the very micro level is considered under microeconomics. On the other hand, when you come to macroeconomics, you study elements like national income, employment, general price level. National income is nothing but GDP of an economy. The employment levels, the general price level, which also shows the level of inflation in an economy, are studied under macroeconomics. Third, in microeconomics, you determine prices of product and factors of production. So, how is that price of a product determined? At the point of intersection of aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve. So, this is the aggregate supply curve, this is the aggregate demand. The point of intersection of these curves determines the price of a product. This is done at the micro level, but the same is not carried out at the macro level. And factors of production. We will be dealing with factors of production in the next lecture when we talk about circular flow of income. Coming to macroeconomics, stability in general price level, inflation, employment, poverty. As I said in the second point, that in macroeconomics you understand or you talk about inflation, employment, poverty or such other elements which to be considered at the macro level, not at the micro level. It does not make any sense to find out inflation for every individual household. So we find out inflation for an entire economy based on a certain formula. The last point is assumption of equilibrium. In microeconomics, it is assumed that an economy will always return to equilibrium no matter where it stands today. This assumption was provided by Adam Smith through the theory of invisible hand, wherein he said that an economy functions on its own through the invisible hand and returns back to equilibrium no matter where it is taken. On the other hand, macroeconomics assumes that there might be a disequilibrium for a very long period of time. This was given by J.M. Keynes in 1930s economy. J.M. Keynes said that an economy will not come back to equilibrium on its own and the government or the people have to take certain steps in order to bring it back to equilibrium. So, the Great Depression became so big because it was assumed that an economy will come back to equilibrium at some or the other point, but it did not happen because of certain underlying macro reasons, and those reasons were given by J.M. Keynes by stating that the economy will not come back to equilibrium unless certain steps are taken by the government. Now let's come to evolution of macroeconomics as a separate branch. We will have to understand the idea of economics in classical thought and how it changed after the Great Depression. The classical thought was prevalent in the 18th and 19th century. The main economists who influenced classical thought were Adam Smith and J.S. Mill. The classical thought basically asserted economy functions well when it is left to function on its own. So they were called liberalists, and the economics that they talked about was called as liberal economics. Their idea was less government for more or for better governance. This is what is being provided by Modi as well, but in a different avatar. So they believed in less government intervention if better governance and better economics is to prevail. This idea was refuted or denied after the depression when the economy could not come back to equilibrium. In 1929, J.M. Keynes came out with another idea which separated macroeconomics from microeconomics. His idea was as follows. First of all, it was the first time that an entire economy was studied as a whole at a macro level. Before J.M. Keynes and the Great Depression, economy was not studied together as a whole but in different parts. Secondly, let's take an example to understand how J.M. Keynes' ideas differed from the classical thought. In the classical thought, the following chain happened. If there is a fall in aggregate demand in the economy, this will result in a fall in prices and wages. When there is a fall in prices and wages, the companies would increase their investment and production in order to take advantage of this fall in prices and wages. When the companies increase their investment and production, the economy will come back to equilibrium because by increasing the production, they are increasing supply in the economy. And when they increase supply in the economy at a lower price, people will start demanding more of the same product at a lesser price, and the economy will come back to equilibrium. But the same did not happen at the time of Great Depression. What happened was the aggregate demand fell, prices and wages also fell, but the fall in prices and wages did not influence or did not incentivize the companies to increase their production and investment. So, this did not happen. Instead, what happened was Because of a fall in prices and wages, companies started producing less, companies started investing less because they started believing that this much production is not going to be consumed in the economy. When the production decreased, investment decreased, and at the same time, prices and wages decreased, the vicious cycle of deflation combined with less production set in. So, people were not consuming, companies were not producing, and prices of everything were going down. This, according to J.M. Keynes, cannot be brought back to equilibrium on its own. And what needs to happen is that the government has to increase their expenditure in order to stimulate aggregate demand. How will the government do it? When the government increases expenditure by producing or by making infrastructure, roads, railways, etc., then it is giving out wages. When it is giving out wages to the people in large numbers, then it is incentivizing these people to go to the market and buy stuff. When these people have higher wages with themselves, they want to buy more, and thus this will stimulate the economy to produce more in order to fulfill the demand of these people. At the same time, James Keynes also talked about lower taxes, because when the government is increasing expenditure and providing more money to the people, at the same time by lowering its taxes, it is providing more income in the hands of the people which they can spend. For example, if the government increases expenditure and provides $10 on an average per day to every person, but at the same time taxes 40% of his income, then the person has only $6 in his pocket. But if the government reduces these taxes to 10%, then the person has $9, and so his disposable income increases. An increase in disposable income of every person in the economy will result in more expenditure by the people and in turn more production. This is what the Indian economy did after the Great Recession, or the recession hit in 2008. The MG Narega was scaled up and people were provided more wages in order to influence them or in order to incentivize them to spend more. Let's have a look at theories of Great Depression, and then we'll talk about the underlying reasons or the causes of the Great Depression of 1930s. There are two major accepted theories related to the Great Depression. The first one is demand driven theory and the second one is monetarist. The demand driven theory was the one given by J.M. Keynes, which said that because of a fall in demand in the economy fell into a depression like scenario. I have already explained how this happened, and this was resolved when the US government started spending at a mass level in order to induce people to spend more and more in the economy. On the other hand, the monetarists said that the Great Depression was not a result of the fall in demand, but was a result of policy mistakes of the Federal Reserve or the central bank of the country. According to the monetarists, at the time of recession, the Federal Reserve should have increased supply of money in the economy, but they went opposite and reduced supply of money in the economy. When they reduced supply of money in the economy, a deflation like scenario set in, wherein people started to keep or hoard money rather than spend money in the belief that the more they hoard, the value of the money will increase in the future because it is a deflationary economy. So, this policy mistake by the Federal Reserve, according to the monetarists, resulted in the Great Depression. Let's come to the causes of the Great Depression now. Understand that these reasons that I'm going to discuss are not trigger points, but they were long term problems with the economy, with the US economy, which resulted in a small trigger point like the stock market crash to bloat or to become big and the Great Depression. The first one is income inequality. In the 1920s, the US economy was going through a big boom period wherein the high in the production levels in the economy and a very big increase in the consumption levels in the economy. Now, majority of these profits were taken away by big industrialists and were not passed on to the people in terms of wages. So, the was not proportionate to the increase in profits of these industries. This resulted in majority of the wealth being held by a small number of people. So, the richest 1% held one third wealth. This showed that a lot of wealth was being held by a very small number of people who did not have the capacity to consume a lot more than the middle class. So, it resulted in a lot of savings and resulted in less investment or less consumption in the economy in the long term because of a lot of wealth being held by a small number of people. Second was high savings of the rich. This is derived from the first one itself. The third is unsustainable economy due to weak and small middle class. So, it is now understood in the entire world that an economy becomes sustainable only when it is supported by a big and a healthy middle class. This was not existing at that time, and a small number of people were holding a large number of cash, whereas a large number of people were earning very less income. We will also be talking about higher debt levels in the economy in the future slides, wherein number of wages did not result in very less consumption by these people, and that is what resulted in a big bubble which burst with the Great Recession or the Great Depression. The second cause is debt of middle class. As I have just said, what happened was there were high profits and high production in the economy. Now, this production had to be consumed by some or the other person. The people, the middle class, wages were not very high, they were increasing but not increasing at a proportionate rate, but it did not stop them from consuming a lot. But how could they consume when they were not earning that much amount of money? This is where the banks came in. They provided easy and cheap debt to the people, to the middle class, which enabled them to consume in higher levels. When they could consume more by taking loans, they did not care whether they earned a lot or they earned little. So, there was high consumption through debt, and at the same time, there was no substantial rise in earnings. So, this is where there are three elements now. First of all, the rich class, then the middle class, and now the banks. This is where the banks came in and ruined the entire economy. Let's come to the third one, guarantee on bank deposits. How did it happen? First of all, banks were providing cheaper debts to the middle class and enabling them to consume more. At the same time, there was no guarantee on the deposits made by the people in these banks. So, these are the loans given by banks, and banks are receiving certain deposits from the people. There were no guarantees on these deposits. How it affected the Great Recession or the Great Depression was that the problem with the profits of the banks after the stock market crash. Because of no guarantees on the bank deposits, people started running towards banks in order to take out their deposits. This was called as bank run. So, because of this bank run, the recession increased in size and became the Great Depression because the trust in banks vanished among the people. Now, how did banks become involved in the recession? Was that banks were integrated with the stock markets, and when the stock markets crashed, then the banks also started crashing because their money was invested in the stock markets. This was another major reason. The last reason is monetary policy, lack of money supply. This I have already discussed. This is what happened according to the monetarists, who said that instead of increasing money supply when the economy entered into a recession, the Federal Reserve reduced money supply. This is what today is named as austerity. So instead of increasing money supply, they reduced money supply, and this resulted in people holding cash because of deflation. Remember then that whenever there is an increase in money supply, it results in inflation, and the opposite happens when there is a decrease in money supply. So these are the major reasons, underlying reasons, which resulted in the Great Depression. In the next lecture, we are going to talk about the circular flow of income.